Welcome back to the Our View podcast. On today's episode, I welcome my guest, Kellina Powell. Join our conversation as Kellina tells us her life experience of living life as a deaf person since the age of 4. I would like to welcome everyone back to another episode of the Our View podcast, where we aim to raise awareness, educate, and change the tone of conversation. I am very happy and excited to welcome my guest today, Kellina Powell, to the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Kellina. I am very happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I just love this podcast because I love listening to different stories, different disability, because especially myself, who a deaf person, and I just feel like it's very important that we, deaf community, advocate for ourselves, but also the disability coming together has in mind and make a whole change.
Yes, and that is exactly what my mission is for creating this podcast and the whole Our View company as a whole, to just get our stories out there, people that live with disabilities, and um, just let people know what we're up to. And we're out here and we're doing big things. So
Exactly.
I'm really excited and really happy that you are open to sharing your story with us all today on the podcast. So, can you introduce yourself? Can you tell us who is Kellina?
So Kellina is 24. She is graduating from psychology, and as well, I'm starting off my own mental health coaching business. As well as starting off my book. So my book is almost finished. I'm super excited to share that with everybody. So Kellina is very strong. She's crazy. She loves to do crazy things, like funny things. One of those lifestyles, right? Like crazy, but not that crazy.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that's pretty much it about me. I'm a deaf person. I became deaf at the age of 4. It was a key transition when I was young. So that was something that I had to struggle over time because I was so used to surrounding myself with the hearing community, and then I've switched to a deaf community. So that was something really cute for me, but I'm always grateful for the opportunity I had. And especially my disability, I would never be here if it wasn't for my disability.
Yeah, that is it's I'm glad you brought that up, that you lost your hearing when you were 4. And so can you tell us what is there a specific diagnosis that you have that caused you to lose your hearing? And again, if you can remember what it was like to go from being able to hear everything to to becoming hard of hearing and having that hearing loss.
I became deaf due to an ear infection, and the doctor prescribed me an eardrop, and I went to a daycare, and they did not follow instruction. So that day, I lost my hearing. The point where I went home, and my mom was calling me. I had no idea she was calling me, and she tapped on my shoulder. I jumped. She freaked out. She was like, "Yeah, mom." She had no idea what was going on. She had to call my grandma. Thankfully, my grandma is a nurse, so she knew what she was doing. And the next day, we went to my family doctor. He said, unfortunately, it's too late. And I remember I was so confused. I was lost. I couldn't hear any voices anymore. The only thing I could hear, like vibration of my voice, like through my neck. And I was just like, what was going on? And then since that day, it was just, I would say I was really lost. I was confused, especially being forward. Don't know what to do.
Right. Yeah, that is for me, I've always lived with my disability, so I don't know what it's like to walk without my braces. Um, I drive a car and people always say, "Well, was it difficult for you to learn how to drive your car?" And I said, "No, I just only had to use the hand controls. I don't know what it was like to drive with my feet. I never drove with my feet before." So for you, especially at such a young age, to um, lose one of your senses of hearing, like that had to be very difficult to understand and then to adapt to. I'm quite sure at such a young age it had to be something difficult to adapt to.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So I know there is I follow you on social media and I follow a few other content creators on Instagram and TikTok. And there is a difference between being deaf and being hard of hearing. Can you give an explanation of what that is, what the difference is, and also to clarify, like, so we all hear you speaking. So can you just clarify what what the difference is between being deaf and hard of hearing, and what that can look like for different people?
Of course, I would say the first thing is, so definition of deaf. So deaf is someone that doesn't wear hearing aids or cochlear implant, who use sign language and doesn't speak. And people who are hard of hearing, they can hear a little bit, or they wear cochlear implant with hearing aid like myself and can speak. And hard of hearing, another definition of hard of hearing can be someone can hear but don't speak, but they do sign language. So that is the two difference, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's really good to hear the actual definition from someone who experiences this condition, because um, people can Google and research on their own for sure, but I always like to, when possible, try to get an accurate definition from someone who actually um, lives with the condition, because everything looks different for every person. uh, you hear about people who have spinal cord injuries and people who are paralyzed, and what it means to be a paraplegic versus a quadriplegic. And the definition is one thing, but every person's body is really different. So, like I said, I always just like to try to clarify when possible with someone who actually is living with the condition itself, with the diagnosis. You mentioned in your in that definition about the way that people who are deaf or hard of hearing communicate, and being able to speak and using sign language. So, what is your preferred way of communicating? Do you know sign language? Do you like to use it? Do you read lips? I know you said you have a hearing aid, so you can hear a little bit and you speak. So, what is the best way, or your choice of communicating with others?
I would say because I would say for me just speaking like a normal way. The
Mhm.
reason for that is because um I learned sign language when I was young, but because I stopped going to a deaf school, and because I stopped going to deaf school, that's the reason why. And the second thing is none of my family members know how to do sign language, and because once again my mom was young, she was going to school, she didn't have time to pick up the sign language to teach me that. So what happened was my family ended up letting me learn and hear and speak, and like let me learn how to communicate to him well as a regular way. And I think it's because they were just so I would say they were just so focused on like the other thing that could be impact me, I would say, because my family members are all hearing. I'm the only deaf person. And a lot of people in my family, all they do is work and try to sacrifice a lot for us, right? All
Mhm.
the younger generation. So for me, it's better for me to communicate normal way. I do not know sign language, unfortunately, because I grew out of it since I switched to a hearing school, from a deaf school. So that's kind of thing that's sad about it. However, luckily, a good friend of mine who actually grew up with from the deaf school, her and I still close friends. So she's actually teaching me sign language because she speaks and does sign language and she can hear.
Wow, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask if it's one of those things, like if you don't use it, you lose it. Um, because I was just having a conversation with someone over the weekend about taking 3 or 4 years of Spanish in high school. high school. I graduated 21 years ago from high school. I don't remember anything of what I learned in Spanish. Very, very little. So
Right.
yeah, so I was wondering if if, like you said, if you were able to remember any of the sign language that you learned when you were younger. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Man, yes, I had to. I had to.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to focus on through my Our View company, which I before the pandemic, I was going to companies to help them with uh, having better interactions with people who have disabilities, and the etiquette that should take place if they're working, or if one of their customers is in a wheelchair or uses crutches or is deaf or hard of hearing or has a service animal. What is the best way for them to interact with that customer who has a specific type of disability? So could you give us one or two tips of etiquette for how one should interact with someone who is deaf or hard of hearing?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. I would say everybody communicate different. That's the number one thing that everybody has to keep in mind.
Mhm.
Uh, for me personally, it's coming from a hard of hearing person perspective, I would say is um to interact with that, right? Interaction. I would say don't assume that the person knows sign language right away. Because I know it's a lot of people be like, okay, you know how to do sign language. I'm gonna do sign language. I'm like, whoa, you didn't even ask what my needs are first before even just jumping, assuming, right? I
Mhm.
would say make sure you ask the person what they need are first. Be calm, just make them feel comfortable. Be like, hi, how can I help you? And I feel like that's a really good way of asking how to communicate. And then second thing, I always like a lot of people may not do this, but carry a pen and a paper in case the person can't hear you, especially those who are deaf and don't hear, but they do sign language, and you may not know sign language.
Mhm.
So that is something I always recommend a lot of people do. But again, not a lot of people are aware of that. So but those are my way of like interacting with some people, especially people who are trying to interact with me too, especially at work or at home or anything like that. I always too tell people like speak really slowly, even though I talk super fast. I'm from the island, so we island people talk fast. So I apologize for him, but so yeah, so that is definitely the interaction, the communication for the deaf person.
That's really funny. I did notice you do talk fast. I'm okay with it, but
Yeah, it's just something that like I'm trying to work on. I guess it's the island thing that
it's
I'm
fine.
trying.
It's fine. But that is a great tip for carrying a pen and paper. I think that's a very good tip, and also for sure asking the person what their needs are, like what is the best way for me to communicate with you? How can I help you? How can I assist you? That is so important. Asking before you help. That's one of my big things that I always stress when I do my presentations, to always ask before you help, because in my situation, I know I've talked about it on my podcast before, but in my situation, it may look like I'm struggling with my crutches and I might have a bag that I'm carrying, but I have it all balanced. So if you just come up
Right.
and try to grab my bag from me, you might throw me off balance and I might fall. So
Exactly.
just asking me, can I get the door for you? Or can I take that bag from you? Like, how can I help you? Is always the best first line of how to approach someone with any type of disability that you perceive may be struggling or having a difficult time, because in reality, they might not be having a difficult time. They might just be,
Exactly. Exactly.
they're making it
Exactly.
work
It's
for
so
them.
true.
Yeah, they're making it work for them, and for how they know how to adapt and how they get through life. So it's so important to ask before you help. And it's a great tip again to ask to have people carry a pen and paper, and usually you always have a piece of scrap paper and a pen or something somewhere laying around in your pocket or something like that. So it's always it's a really really good helpful tip. So thanks for that. And very similarly to the last question, what would you say is most misunderstood about those who are deaf or hard of hearing? What is something that people assume about you, or something that you wish people knew about you, that doesn't that may not be apparent on the surface?
I love that question so much. And I would say that don't assume too much. Don't guess too much. I get that so many times people always assume that, like, I remember for example, like, where was I? I think I was at a store, and then the person got my hearing aid, and they came to me like, "Oh my god, you wear hearing aid? Oh my god, you're deaf? What? Like, don't do that. Like, that's the most ignorant thing I hate when people do, especially when they just people get shocked when they see someone that have a disability in general, and they always do the face expression. That's something I do not like. I
Hmm.
was like, I get offended a little bit, but it's just like I never asked for this, but I'm grateful for what I have. But you don't need to act like that. And I
Right.
know people can be so dramatic sometimes. I'm like,
Right. Right. Let's
I always
pipe
tell
down a little
people,
bit.
whoa, slow,
Right.
slow it down. Like, that is something that I really hate about when people do that, especially when they see me wearing hairnet. And I feel like people act like they never seen it, but yet there's some people on it, especially there's some movies about it, but it's not so common and it's very rare, I would say.
Yes.
The second thing is I would say is they always thinking that, like I mentioned before, like they always just think I do sign language where I don't. And
Mhm.
I always be like, no, I do not do sign language. You should have asked me that. So it's understandable because people just think it's sign language automatic. So I just don't like that. I know a lot of people just, try to help, but sometimes they're not helping. And the third thing is, caption your Instagram videos and so on. Because I notice them now, a lot of people just use a brick, like a word, and they just summarize what they're saying instead of actually having it word for word what they're actually saying. So
Right.
that's something I just really don't like. I've seen a lot of people do that, and I always tell people don't do that because I have no idea what you just said. Even
Mhm.
though like my hearing aid is Bluetooth, I can hear very well through my hearing aid. But sometimes there's times where I don't want to turn on the sounds, right? Everybody does that. Everybody does not want to hear sound. So that is something that, yeah, that like bothers a lot of us, especially out of hearing deaf community. I noticed that a lot, especially interaction with a lot of different people on Instagram. And we have small conversation, get to know each other. Like, oh my god, like I hate when they do that. I hate when they do that. So yeah.
Yeah. Great, great advice. And I myself I'm still trying to get better with all of that. So I admit I am not the best at it, but I am getting better. And and I think that's important to mention that uh, that people are trying, and the real conversation that needs to happen is with those who are in the deaf and hard of hearing community, to find out what works best for people like yourself. And where someone, I don't have hearing loss, I'm not deaf, so I don't know. And so it's again back to what you said, assuming things and making assumptions about people, and like, oh, this will work, oh, this is fine if I just do this, when it's not really beneficial to those within the deaf and hard of hearing community. So to have a conversation like this with you, to hear you bring that up, makes me aware of what it is I need to do to improve myself, and make my content better and more accessible and more inclusive. So I really appreciate that, and we will definitely be having more conversations off off of the podcast about that. So
Yes.
so before we wrap this up, can you tell people where they can find you online. And also, if you could talk about your book a little bit, if you're allowed to, and what it will be about and when it'll be available, would love to, have you mention that as well.
For sure. So where everybody can find me. So on Twitter, you can find me on Cutie Kellina, and Instagram, Def Queen Boss. My website, which is finally updated and published, is KellinaEmpowerment.com. And about my book, so my book is mixed with poetry and biography. So basically, it talks about my deaf experience in the hearing community, my thoughts, what I'm thinking, how do I communicate with someone that was hearing versus being in the deaf community. So I mixed it up with you. I would say it called Every Day I Hear I Am Just Deaf. Pretty cool topic. Pretty cool
Oh, I
topic.
love that.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Every day yeah, that's pretty my topic. And but yeah, that's pretty much it. And and my mental health coaching business, which is starting up as well. You guys can see that on my website as well, especially for those who need, a little support, or who want to find a coach or a mentor that actually have a disability who relate to them. Because myself, I never came across someone who was a therapist or a coach who have the same disability as me, and we disability people feel comfortable going to people who have a similar experience, and they feel more comfortable than someone that doesn't have it. So that's why my goal is to be out there to help the disability community to actually, just be themselves again, I would say.
Yes, I am so glad that you are doing that work again. I majored in psychology, and I have um, a great passion for psychology and people who are doing either mental health counseling or life coach type of work. It is so important, and especially for those in the disability community and people of color. And as you said, to have someone with a disability as your coach or your therapist, and you having a disability yourself as the client, I think there's definitely something there that connects you to each other, where you can relate to each other on a different type of level, where it may not take place if the counselor or the coach didn't have a disability. So I am very happy that you are doing that work. It's really great, and really excited for your book. I will definitely be reading that when it comes out, and all the work that you're doing. It's really great, and I'm grateful to have connected with you, and thank you so much for your time today with this conversation, and letting us into your world of living with this hearing loss diagnosis. And it's just really, again, great to know you, and great to meet you and see you face to face virtually. But yeah, so we will definitely be in touch, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Our View podcast. Leave us a review wherever you listen, and let us know what you liked about this episode. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and be sure to follow us on all social media platforms for more disability-related content at Our View for Life. That's OURVIEW, the number 4, LIFE. If you listen to this episode on your phone, take a screenshot and post it to your Instagram or Facebook stories, and be sure to tag us. We thank you for listening, and take care.